Welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's, a weekly podcast from St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Orlando that invites you to go deeper with Scripture to learn God's story so that together we can live, love, and lead a life following Jesus to awaken disciples and reveal the kingdom. In this Lenten series called Bewildered, we'll be looking at the wilderness story through the Gospel of John. Get ready for some conversations with our St. Luke's pastors as they help guide our hearts to find stability in the midst of bewilderment. You'll find a link to some questions you can use for discussion and personal reflection in the show notes. You can also download a free Lenten devotional to help guide you through the season. And if you're enjoying this series, like and subscribe or consider leaving us a review so that others can find us and grow in their faith. Now, let's hear what the pastors have to share with us this week.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Your Week with St. Luke's. You have all of your pastors here, Jed, Melissa, and Jen. And we are in our, fourth week of Lent. I don't even know where we are at this point. I'm so lost.
The fourth.
I'm so lost in the wilderness.
1, 2. It's the third.
Okay.
It's the third.
Okay.
Yeah. It's because Ash Wednesday throws us off.
Got it.
That's the fourth podcast.
Wednesday does throw us off, doesn't it?
Correct. It disorients us. We are disoriented.
I was about to say, if we had planned this part of the conversation, we might have been trying to exemplify bewilderment and disorientation.
Really hard. Snort.
Well, we are here together and we are looking this week at what it means to be servants. So we are picking up in John 13, verses 1 through 17. Do any of y'all want to read and get us kicked off there?
I can do that. This is typically, let's just go ahead and claim, this is the typical Holy Thursday reading. And so, of course, we will visit this again during Holy Week and Holy Thursday, during our Holy Thursday service, which is usually what we've been doing the last couple of years has been a time of real worship, music and worship in a different way. And so hear this and let's try and hear it anew in a different time and space in Lent.
Right.
If that makes sense. So before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his time had come to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them fully. Jesus and his disciples were sharing the evening meal. The devil had already provoked Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew the Father had given everything into his hands and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the table and he took off his robe and picking up a linen towel, he tied it around his waist. And then he poured water into a wash basin and he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that he was wearing. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't understand what I'm doing now, but you will understand later." "No," Peter said, "you will never wash my feet." Jesus replied, "Unless I wash you, you won't have a place with me." Simon Peter said, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." And Jesus responded, "Those who have bathed need only to have their feet washed because they are completely clean. You disciples are clean, but not every one of you." He knew who would betray him, and that's why he said, "Not every one of you is clean." And after he washed the disciples' feet, he put on his robes and returned to his place at the table, and he said, "Do you know what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you speak correctly, because I am. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too must wash each other's feet. I have given you an example, just as I have done. You also must do. I assure you, servants aren't greater than their masters, nor are those who are sent greater than the one who sent them. Since you know these things, you will be happy if you do them."
Mm-hmm. Judas, just side note, continues to get... those John and Judas must have had some beef.
I know. Judas looks really, really...
Well,
telling a story, which, by the way, Judas.
but that's also the whole Gospel of John. I find the Gospel of John quite pretentious because John is like,
I am the beloved.
I'm so much farther along in history. I know a lot more, and so let me tell you how to interpret everything.
I was arguing with Mary about who is the real beloved, Mary Magdalene. We can get into that discussion later, but yes, he was trying to prove himself up against the Gospel of Mary because they're written at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Just
side note.
I like Luke that just lets us have a story and just lets us do what we will with the story.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's okay.
But John is being pretentious because John is taking a bigger scope,
Absolutely.
like lifting us above humanity to this bigger understanding,
Yeah.
which our humanity gets in the way of that sometimes too.
I jokingly say pretentious, just
And one of the favorite stories from John is text. Like you said, it's typically Monday, Thursday, where the mandates of Jesus are, and this text is the mandates that we get from Jesus, which are just profound.
just a quick callback to a couple weeks ago where we saw the other Last Supper story that we kind of fell in love with, of another Last Supper where he was with Mary and Martha as well. So again, we get a washing of feet, but this time it's Jesus washing his disciples' feet and a meal and all of that. So we're now at the sort of traditional Last Supper story.
So I have a quote in here that I was reading something. It says, "Feet are a big thing in John's gospel," which is interesting. And it said, just so we understand what is going on here, I'm going to just read this. "People traveled by foot on dusty, rocky roads where animals also left their droppings. Foot washing was often done by a servant and signaled a gracious amenity for a guest, as well as good housekeeping. Also, a person of high status was shown respect by a social inferior who falls at the feet of the better to show honor and humility as a plead, or to plead a petition. Feet carried what was in the head and heart if there was a message to be delivered, as wandering philosophers would understand." I just thought that was an interesting little. Feet carried what was in the head and the heart. And was Jesus in this moment washing, Mary washed Jesus' feet, he washed there, because now they were going to have to be the one who carried in their head and their heart what they will experience in the next 6 days or 3 days or 4 days or
the years to come.
Correct. Yeah. Right. And that their feet had better get ready in that respect.
And that makes me get ready. Makes me think of the preparation, like we just talked about, but also it's actually what's happening, right? Mary anoints, washes his feet. She's the first example of it. And then Jesus does the same thing. And preparing for what's ahead, we need to be servants. Because as soon as Jesus begins to take off his robes, he's lowering himself. Because what you wore still today signifies your class, your stature, your power. Then to get down to the feet is another step, literally down, and then to actually wash them. He is not just going to one place, he's going all the way. And that says to me, like, that's our preparation, what's going to carry our head and heart and our feet.
Right. Which is interesting because when we are disoriented, when we're in wilderness, when our life is in chaos, our want or our maybe human reaction is to isolate. Right.
Yep.
And it's also to find, that's where the judgment starts. That's where I got to find myself better than someone else. Mm-hmm. I got to find my superiority. And we don't do it on purpose. It's just, we start to pick on other things that make us feel better about ourselves to try and find control,
right.
Well, look at what's happening here. And at least my life's not that chaotic, or at least I'm not in that kind of wilderness. And Jesus is telling us this counterintuitive, no, go and serve. Like in those moments, you ground yourself, you stay centered, you stay obedient by serving another person, which is I find to be not just counterintuitive, but it's calls for a discipline, but like a spiritual discipline that you don't always run off of.
Yeah.
The fuel, it's not the fuel you run off of.
And it calls for obedience from last week. To be obedient to being Christ-centered calls us to, so what you're explaining there psychologically is that natural tendency to push others down so we feel like we're up. And Jesus is calling us to put yourself down and lift others up.
And in this story, and John says it very explicitly, is there is not a litmus test to whether Jesus serves you. There is not a, I know things are going to go south with you soon, so I'm not washing your feet. I'm not serving you. I'm not going to. And he washes everybody's feet, doesn't ask for anything for it, doesn't expect anything, knows Peter and Judas, and this whole picture is about to happen,
100%.
but isn't looking for anything from them as a result. And that's where that idea of serving, like, I love to volunteer. I love to show up places, to that idea of being a servant.
Correct. Right.
That's that kind of differentiation. Not that those can't be the same thing, but the difference between, we always say, when you volunteer and when you serve and you do you get just as much out as you give.
Right.
And that's fine. But is that why we serve? Is that our motivation? Right. That's a benefit.
Right.
But also, I have done a good bit of serving where I did not get as much out of it as I gave. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah.
Because what did Jesus do?
Right.
They betrayed by all of them. What are you expecting?
Yeah.
Well, and it is interesting too, that differentiation between service and volunteering and being a servant is a different posture of the heart.
Yes. Yep.
And I don't know that I've ever differentiated it in that way, but yeah, because even when we serve and even when we volunteer, we can still place ourselves above the people that we're serving.
That's the worst way too.
But we don't necessarily realize we're doing it.
Yes.
Usually we're doing it internally. Yeah. The why, right? Simon Sinek's The Why. Why is this? Well, it's because Christ, my Lord, who I'm centered in, who I'm obedient to, served,
right,
and calls me to serve.
Whenever I will invite somebody into a volunteer role or say, I think this might be a good fit for you, and they say, oh, I don't know if I'm qualified for that. I know. Right. We're on the right track.
Right.
Because they don't see it as a lifting up of themselves in that way. They don't immediately go, ooh, I will feel important if I do this. They think in that humility way of is this even my role? And not always. That's not 100% of the time, but those are some of those pieces that
Telltales.
Yeah. Right. Start to give you an idea.
And it is interesting because, the first few verses is all setting up not only, when it is, so the festival of the Passover, this is a moment of liberation, right? That they're celebrating who they are. And Jesus knows that what's going to happen is is going to be a moment of liberation for all the world. And he is being liberated because it says that God has put everything into his hands, right? You this is yours now. Take this and keep being obedient and go all the way to the end. But it also explicitly says what Judas is about to do. And so you mentioned it, Melissa, but what does it mean to be a servant of one who will betray you and send you to your death?
Yep.
What does it mean to be a servant of the one who is Peter, who in so many ways is the rock of the group, who Jesus knows is going to be the one who's going to become the next proclaimer? I think Jesus sees that in Peter and understands that about Peter. But he knows Peter is going to deny him. He knows that Peter's going to struggle. And so what does that look like to be able to get down and kneel at their feet and look them in the eye? That's a servanthood that's not just about serving the person, but serving God.
And it comes out of a centeredness,
right,
that responds with obedience into servanthood. And that's what we've been starting to put together this whole Lent, is that each of these weeks lead into the next one, that you can't do this kind of service if you haven't embraced a faithful obedience. And that word obedience can be tricky because it gets used in icky ways at times, but the idea of being faithful to what you know and doing the thing even when it looks counterintuitive.
Right.
This kind of service is about that obedience and can only come from a person who's centered.
And as I listen to the two of you talk about that, it leads me to the end of the text that you didn't read, Jen, because that's the other mandate, to love.
Right.
And I'd have to look at the Greek, but I'm pretty sure that the Greek that Jesus uses for love most often in the New Testament,
Right.
and I'm pretty sure it's in John as well, is agape.
Right. Right.
Which is unconditional, which is I will wash the feet of everyone in front of me. I will serve all of the people a meal, all 5,000. Doesn't matter how they voted. Doesn't matter their economic status. I will serve. I will serve. That's agape love lived out. Jesus coming down.
Yeah, you're referencing so he does this whole servant thing. He washes their feet. And then he has this conversation with Judas, and then the betrayal, the whoever dips the bread happens, right? And then Judas leaves and he says, I give you this commandment, love each other. Just as I have loved you, so you must love each other. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other. In other words, they're not going to know because you say it. They're not going to know because they recognized you as a face that stood in the crowd with me. They're not even going to know because you denied me, right? They're going to know because you've done what I've done, which starts with love is defined by not just washing feet, but by servanthood. Right. Yeah. Right. By breaking bread, by healing people, because healing people was not just because he was the Messiah, but he was serving people who were broken. Yeah. Right. He was touching the leper. He was doing the things that others looked on with disdain as a way to serve them into the healing, transformative power of abundant life. Right.
And it's not by going and telling people how they've got it all wrong and yelling at them.
No.
and telling them, I don't know if you should be preaching all that love. You're missing all of the other. This is the picture. This is the picture right here, is laying yourself down in acts of love, in acts of servanthood, even or especially to the people who you expect the least from.
Right. Which again, when we have this conversation in my family all the time, like when we're struggling with anxiety, when we're struggling with depression, when we're struggling with just like everything feels out of control, it's like, you know what? Take yourself out of yourself. Just how can you find a way to serve another? How can you be there for another? Because it's a way of pulling yourself out of your own moment, right. Out of and lifting your head up to look around you, because which also helps you understand not all the world is wilderness.
Right.
Not all the world is chaos. Not all the world is bewilderment. But if we are willing to stay in the bewilderment enough to be obedient and to learn these lessons, it helps us look around and go, oh, I will get to the other side of whatever this is. Oh, there can be resurrection. And I'll be different because I learned how to serve another person in the midst of my own struggle for a moment, for a second. And as our thing says, when I am bewildered, I can still serve, which sometimes when we're in the wilderness, we don't think we can do anything.
Right. There's this idea that I have to be complete in some way before I can. Mm-hmm. And there are things that you need to have done work to then serve in certain ways, but to serve and to give of yourself in some way is part of the journey, is part of the growth, is part of the personal development as well. And so the waiting until everything is just where you want it, you're never going to get there.
Right. And the rest of what we wrote is, when I'm bewildered, I can still serve because of Jesus. I know vengeance is not mine to take. Like it's just like at some point.
But what if it is? No.
Yeah, but like at some point We got to walk away from the Judases and the Peters of the world and just go, hey, this is not
our justice.
This is not my bag, not my monkey, not my circus. Even when the harm has been done to you.
Yep.
Like at some point to heal, to get to the other side, to be resurrected, at some point we do just offer those things to God and say, let me take care of someone and take care of you at the same time. Is that crazy? I don't know.
It's that, and again, it's John is inviting us to that cosmic level, but that idea of justice is God's, vengeance is God's. If there is vengeance to be taken,
Right.
that's also a whole other conversation we get in. But the idea that I need to mete out whatever someone deserves, it isn't scriptural. It isn't what we see Jesus do. It isn't what we see, the examples that we have in scripture. So to be able to let go of that and go, you know what? That's not mine.
Right. And it is interesting. So we've got this, let's see, this comes in chapter 13. Let me double check before I make a mistake. Yeah. I mean, comes after he's annealed and he's come into Jerusalem, right? And he's taught, and now he's like, okay, the first thing I'm going to do in this week is I'm going to sit with my people. And he is going to teach, which we're going to hear in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
He's going to give his final message, his parting words, his farewell address, so to speak, to those who are closest to him. But first, to prepare them to hear it, he's going to show them what love looks like.
That's right. That goes back to the first part of our conversation, preparation. How do we prepare?
Yep.
It's humbling ourselves, not pushing others down, but putting ourselves. Servants.
Well, we'll see you on Sunday when we go a little bit deeper with this and invite you into what it means to be a servant for yourself, because you have been centered and you have been obedient. And now what does it mean to serve? We'll see you on Sunday.